Hey friends, welcome back to Midweek as we continue through our series of the Pre-Incarnate Christ. All the way up until Christmas, we've been talking about who Jesus was before he took on flesh, before he became flesh and blood like you and I. Who was he? How did he exist if he has always existed? And so last week, we talked about how Jesus is the Word of God, looking at John chapter 1. Tonight, we're going to talk about how Jesus is the angel of the Lord. In the Old Testament, oftentimes when you see the angel of the Lord appearing, manifesting, communicating all these things to the prophets, to the people, whoever he's manifesting himself to, we have to assume, based on the research, that this is the angel of the Lord. Now, this comes with some skepticism, and I can understand why. Some of the scholars don't necessarily buy into Jesus being the angel of the Lord. And the reason why is because they look at the angel as being created. And they go to Ezekiel 28. Now, this verse in Ezekiel is specifically talking about Lucifer, as we know him as Satan. And it does say that he was an anointed cherub, perfect in all of creation. And so that verse in Ezekiel 28 does indicate that angels are a created being. And so the angel of the Lord, therefore, must be a created being as well. Another argument that they present is that an angel, their role, their functionality is to be messengers of God. And that's only what the angel of the Lord appears to be doing, is communicating God's message to the people. So there's nothing extravagant in their mind about the angel of the Lord. We should be looking at him just as another angel. But I strongly disagree, and many scholars do as well, that this is more than just a typical angel. One, the characteristics of this angel of the Lord is so different than all the other angels. And hopefully, as we present the lesson tonight, you're going to catch on and you're going to agree as well, because I've always maintained this, that when we have issues like this in the Bible, not just biblical issues of any kind, we should always allow the Bible to identify their own terminology. Let them define what they mean by explaining to us these concepts. And so let's look to see how the angel of the Lord identifies himself. And those are the things that you should be looking to when answering this question. And so what we're going to do is we're not going to go into all of the research tonight. I'm going to try to give you just a quick understanding of how I've come to the conclusion that the angel of the Lord is what we know as a Christophany. Now, you may have heard the word theophany, which is basically a manifestation of God in any form, right? But a Christophany is specific to Jesus, a manifestation of God that is specific to Jesus. And that's what I believe the angel of the Lord is. Now, the reason I come to that conclusion is through the book of Revelation. Now, all the way at the end, we get Revelation. It was written by John, who is retiring in an island by himself in Patmos, where an angel, sometimes it's Jesus, sometimes it's another angel, that is bringing this revelation to him about what the end is going to look like, about what heaven's going to look like, and all these things in between. And in the very last chapter, Revelation 28, in the beginning, I think it's verse 8, but what you're going to see is that when John is getting this revelation, he falls down and begins to worship this angel that is revealing some of these things to him. And the angel quickly rebukes John. He says, whoa, wait a minute. I can't accept worship. You and I are on the same team. We are nothing more than just servants of the Most High God. Just like the prophets of the old, we are all on the same level here. God is God alone, and we cannot accept worship. And so this angel kind of quickly rebukes John, and they go along their way. Now, if you look at the angel of the Lord and even Jesus himself in the Gospels, what you're going to see is that when there's worship being presented, they don't rebuke, they accept. Look at Jesus first in the Gospels when he's healing people of sicknesses, diseases, possessions, when he's raising people from the dead or doing whatever he does. Oftentimes you'll see people worship him. And as they worship him, you never see Jesus say, whoa, I can't accept your worship. I'm not God. Instead, what you see is he accepts their worship. And then he tells them, go and sin no more, or whatever he goes to do with them. But Jesus, we've seen over and over throughout the Gospels, he does accept worship. And then when you go back into the Old Testament, I want to share two stories of this, where this happens in the Old Testament. even though there's plenty of them, you can find some a lot on your own too. But I'll give you two. The first one comes from Joshua chapter 5. Now in Joshua 5, they're getting ready to go into Jericho. Jericho is going to fall into their hand. They already know this is going to happen. God has instructed them on how to do this. And as Joshua is contemplating this, at the end of chapter 5, a man appears. And Joshua has no clue who this is. He's carrying a sword. He's got everything ready to go. And Joshua comes to approach him and he says, listen, are you with us or are you against us? And the angel of the Lord, basically, he says, I am neither. I am the host of the Lord's army. And he goes on to say, okay. And then Joshua begins to worship. Notice he accepts Joshua's worship, but then he tells Joshua this, take off your sandals, for you are standing on holy ground. Now, this is a reminder of Exodus 3, when Moses was talking to the burning bush, and the angel of the Lord specifically mentioned there is speaking out, right? Speaking out to Moses as he's coming. He draws him closer. He says, hey, come closer. And he goes, as he's drawing closer, he shouts out to him, now, Moses, wait a second, take off your sandals, for you are standing on holy ground. Now, if you've ever read the book of Leviticus or understood the Mosaic law, you probably should research what the rabbis of that day talk about. And so the best people that can give you a great example of what this looks like are probably Jewish rabbis of today. And so there was a pretty well-known one. I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but he did an entire commentary on the book of Leviticus. And here's what he holds. He essentially says that nobody, no thing, nothing can make anything holy except for God alone. He is the only thing that can deem or declare anything to be holy. It's simply holy because God says so. And so with that in mind, when you see these examples of Exodus 3 and Joshua 5, where the ground in which they stand is holy ground, you have to assume that the presence of God is there. Now you may say, well, that could still be an angel of the Lord coming in as a theophany to represent what God is doing in God's mission. But never do you see where an angel can declare anything holy or make anything holy. That only comes from God alone. So with that said, we have to assume that the angel of the Lord, the one that is in charge of the heavenly host, is none other than Jesus himself. The last example I want to share with you comes from Genesis chapter 16, the very first book of the Bible. And you meet this woman named Hagar. Now, to give you a quick backstory of who she is, Hagar is the servant girl of Sarah. Now, if you remember, God promised Abraham that he would have a child, and that child would begin this entire nation of Israel. It's all going to come from the loins of Abraham. And so as they're patiently waiting for this promise to take place, they're ripe in their old age. It's just not happening. And so Sarah comes to the conclusion that maybe God wasn't intending her to be a part of that story. He promised Abraham this nation, not necessarily Sarah. So maybe she's not part of this equation. And she goes to Abraham and offers her servant Hagar. That's who she is. And she goes to Abraham and says, hey, have you considered Hagar? Maybe the promise is with her. And so that happens. They have a child. Its name is Ishmael. And Hagar and Ishmael, everything's rolling fine until God tells them that's not the promised child. Sarah and Abraham, you will have this child. They go into conceive, and then they have Isaac. And so now that Isaac and Ishmael are growing up together, Sarah is growing very jealous. She goes to Abraham and says, what should we do here? Abraham says, hey, it's really not my issue. She's your servant. You kind of deal with this. And so she just basically exoduses her. She kicks her out. She declares her gone and basically bans her from the land. And so as Hagar is moving on with her son, God appears to her. Well, the son's not born yet, but God appears to Hagar as the angel of the Lord in Genesis 16. And that's where he meets with her and he promises her. He says, hey, Hagar, here's what's going to happen. You're going to have a son. His name is Ishmael. I'm going to keep my promise that I gave to them, and I'm going to extend it to you as well. He also will have a great nation, be the father of many. And as she's sitting there kind of just depressed and broken, and God comes to reveal this to her, the angel of the Lord comes to reveal this to her, all of a sudden things begin to change and she worships the angel of the Lord. Not only does she worship, she goes to say in verse 13, you are the God of seeing. So she declares him God as well. And as the angel of the Lord accepts that worship and then continues to direct her and guide her, that's what takes place. And so, friends, as we move into this Christmas season, what I hope that you understand as you follow through with this research, as you're trying to see who Jesus was before he became flesh, is that he always was existent and he always was active. From the very beginning of creation all the way through for the rest of eternity, Jesus always was. He always is, and he always will be. And as we conclude next week on Christmas Day, Jesus is not only the Word of the Lord, the angel of the Lord, he is also the Son of God. Those are his pre-existent titles. And next week, as we close on Christmas Sunday, Christmas morning, may we reflect on Jesus being so much more than we could ever imagine. And as we go to talk about him being the Son of God. And as we continue through this Advent season, may we prepare our hearts for the coming King. Friends, have a great week. We'll see you next time.